So, something which probably doesn't come through these podcasts, but something that I want to make perfectly clear in this short podcast recording, is I try to be as much of a pragmatist as I can be. And that may not come through these recordings particularly well. But I want to outline what has happened today and also talk a little bit about why I've made the decisions that I've made. So I've talked historically about the C-Line development, SimC-Line, that I was working on for probably the past 2 or so years. I think the 8th month, which is August, is when I started talking about this in 2020, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I probably need to go back and actually work out when I started talking about this. And also I have a substantial amount of writing associated with it currently, which I'm obviously going to have to re-edit when you hear the news. So for 5 years through my earlier simulation development, I worked with a gentleman called Bob Mottram, technically probably about 3 out of 5 years. But I maintained relatively close communication with him. And with the early development of C-Line, Bob was heavily involved. But I noticed relatively recently, well, at least for the past 2 months, he's kind of dropped off the development. And it was clear to me that there were certain aspects of the development that Bob just wasn't interested in. He was interested in the map data initially. But I've also historically worked with Bob on agent modeling. And I couldn't really understand why he wasn't that interested in the agent modeling component of C-Line. But it became relatively clear to me that it was the military German home guard aspects of C-Line that he wasn't interested in. And also in doing this project, I realized through the past 2 years that actually simulating London, which had a population at the time about 8.5 million, was a reasonable sized project. It was going to take a considerable chunk of time to get that working relatively properly, and certainly to get the map data the way it was needed, and a wide variety of things which Bob had not necessarily left in a state where it just wasn't feasible, but he was certainly, it was necessary basically to do a lot of additional work, particularly manual editing of all of London, which in and of itself is quite a substantial ask before the agent models would work. And also I found not necessarily the Home Guard, but certainly the German literature really burdensome. Like to have these primary documents that relate to the bombing of English towns and London specifically, and relate to the Luftwaffe, relate to the Luftwaffe training, relate to the Hitler Youth and the Hitler Youth training, and all of this in the original German, was something that I thought increasingly was just nothing that I could explain to anyone realistically. And actually the reason that there's so much writing associated with SimC-Line was really to try and understand the nature of this documentation myself in the purpose of writing it in a simulation. So to remove the SimC-Line component of this thing and make it London in 1940 seemed like a very positive way to get Bob Mottram to continue to be involved and also to potentially involve others in the future, with the view that the burdensome aspect of the project through making it into C-Line would just not be an issue. Now, whether it's the case somewhere in the future, once we've gotten London in 1940 working exceptionally and have learnt a bunch of stuff and have a bunch of really good agent models and a bunch of really good maps and things like that, yes, potentially somewhere in the future this could be revisited. But practically, there's enough work in London in 1940 to keep at least me and certainly Bob Mottram quite busy for the next few years. So I decided today explicitly that we are going to be simulating London in 1940 and not concentrate on any of the C-Line material, which fundamentally changes a few aspects of the development. It eliminates the war simulation and makes it purely associated with getting the urban simulation up to snuff. And it means certainly websites and some documentation needed to change and these kind of things. Really, the direction of the project will change for me. For me, the burden of holding this documentation, this source material, is going to be something which is, I think, hopefully going to be less of a burden. And certainly in terms of the writing about London in 1940, the, Luftwaffe training information and the directory basically associated with the Battle of Britain and, bombing England, not necessarily something that I need to hold on to as I have historically. I mean, looking through it is stunning, but it has a quality to it which just is not positive in any way, shape or form. And the knowledge and assessment of things like the movement of the Hitler Youth into the SS, to have that information, the primary source material for that, is not particularly edifying either. So it gives me the opportunity, in large part, to reassess my relationship with the project as well. So I've launched today London1940.org, which is the number 1940, London, the number 1940.org, which is going to be the main hub. And thankfully, because of the source code I'd put into GitLab, the movement to strictly an urban simulation and a lot of the existing stuff, which Bob had already done in command line to move the PNG files to JSON and things like this, that all stays in place. So it really, I estimated it was probably going to take me a week to move it over, but with a bit of, bona fide elbow grease this evening, it was relatively easy to do. But it changes a lot of stuff. I am writing as well a extension of my Just Plain Chaos rules, which are fundamentally a role-playing game, skirmish/war game, to be set in probably a sea lion-like environment. So it isn't all lost. I mean, that's the main takeaway from this, is a majority of it stays in place, and the stuff that I'm not using immediately is very edifying not to use. And that's really all I have to say about that. I just wanted to let the podcast audience know that wherever necessary, I can exert some degree of pragmatism on the stuff that I do. And this is really an example of how important to me Bob Mottram's work has been historically, both with my previous simulation and also the existing work associated with London in 1940 to date, and how important it'll be to have him as someone who's continuing to do this work, which really, as a father of two, a father of a young two, it is critical to have someone like Bob Mottram on board just periodically, just giving updates, forcing me to do things, forcing me to perturb him in some way, really. And that's what's come out of this thing, is just the necessity, really, to have someone else involved to the level that Bob has been, and also to adjust the project to suit Bob, fundamentally, which I hope I've done. Time will tell what comes out of this ongoing evolution. But I don't think it detracts from anything, really, that I was looking to say, aside from some kind of review or analysis associated with the Second World War, which I don't really think I'm losing through this. It just means that the stuff that I'm working on is maybe slightly more mainstream, which is always important in this day and age. Tom Barbalet in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out.